The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled with the light of 1,000 crystals as Britain's most influential figures gathered for the annual Royal Foundation Gala. Queen Camilla stood before her ornate dressing room mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had traveled an extraordinary journey from controversial figure to respected royal. Tonight would mark another significant moment in that ongoing transformation. Lady Susan Hussey, her trusted lady-in-waiting, carefully arranged the final touches of Camilla's midnight blue evening gown. The dress was elegant yet understated, perfectly suited for a woman who had learned to navigate the delicate balance between royal grandeur and public sentiment. But something was missing from the ensemble. "Your Majesty," Lady Susan said softly, opening the velvet-lined jewelry box that contained Camilla's collection of royal gems. "Which pieces would you prefer this evening?" Camilla paused, her fingers hovering over the familiar sapphire set that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. These were safe choices, pieces that carried the weight of tradition without controversy. Yet something stirred within her, a quiet rebellion against the careful path she had walked for so many years. Her eyes moved instead to a smaller, more delicate case that had arrived earlier that week. Inside lay the diamond Riviere necklace, a stunning creation of perfectly matched diamonds that had been crafted in the 1930s. This was not just any piece of royal jewelry. This was Catherine's necklace, the Princess of Wales' signature piece that had become synonymous with modern royal elegance. The necklace had become Kate's defining accessory over the past decade. She had worn it to state banquets, royal portraits, and countless formal occasions. The British public associated this particular piece with the future queen, and royal watchers could spot it instantly in any photograph. The diamonds had been restrung and modernized for Catherine, transforming a historical piece into something fresh and contemporary. "Perhaps something different tonight," Camilla murmured, her voice carrying a note of determination that surprised even herself. Lady Susan followed her gaze to the diamond Riviere and hesitated. The unspoken protocols of royal jewelry were complex and deeply ingrained. While technically all crown jewels belonged to the monarch and could be worn by any senior royal, there were invisible lines of ownership and association that were rarely crossed. "Your Majesty, are you certain?" Lady Susan asked delicately, understanding immediately the significance of the choice. Camilla lifted the necklace from its case, feeling the weight of the diamonds against her palms. Each stone caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes, creating a constellation of sparkles that would be impossible to miss in any crowd. This was not a piece that could be worn quietly or without notice. "Yes," she said firmly, "I think it's time." As Lady Susan fastened the clasp behind Camilla's neck, both women understood they were crossing into uncharted territory. The relationship between Camilla and Catherine had always been cordial, but carefully maintained. They moved in the same circles, attended the same events, and shared the same duties, yet their interactions were governed by the complex hierarchy of royal precedents and the even more complex dynamics of family relationships. Catherine, as the future queen consort, held a position that many believed Camilla was simply keeping warm. Despite years of dedicated service and growing public approval, Camilla remained acutely aware that she was seen by many as a transitional figure. Catherine represented the future of the monarchy, young, glamorous, and beloved by the public in ways that Camilla, despite her best efforts, might never achieve. The choice to wear Catherine's signature necklace was loaded with meaning. It could be interpreted as a gesture of unity, a passing of the torch, or something far more controversial, a claim to equal status that challenged the established order. Charles entered the dressing room as Lady Susan was making the final adjustments. The king, resplendent in his white tie and tails, paused mid-sentence as his eyes fell upon his wife. The familiar sight of the diamond Riviere stopped him entirely, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling into something unreadable. "That's—" he began, then stopped himself. "Beautiful," Camilla suggested, turning to face him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Charles had been king for over a year now, but he still sometimes looked surprised by the weight of his crown and the complexity of his position. He had waited his entire life to rule, yet the reality of kingship had brought challenges he hadn't fully anticipated. Managing his family's public image while navigating their private relationships had become one of his most delicate responsibilities. "It suits you," he said carefully, though his voice carried undertones of concern. The king understood jewelry politics perhaps better than anyone. He had watched his mother navigate these waters for decades, had seen how a single accessory choice could trigger weeks of media speculation and public debate. Queen Elizabeth II had been a master of subtle messaging through her wardrobe choices, and Charles had learned to read these signals like a language. Camilla adjusted the necklace slightly, the diamonds catching the light and sending sparkles across the room's cream-colored walls. "Catherine won't be attending tonight. She's at home with the children." This was true. The Princess of Wales had committed to attending a charity event in Wales earlier in the week, and palace schedules were sacred things, rarely changed without significant reason. But Charles knew, and Camilla knew, that Catherine's absence didn't make the choice any less significant. "The photographers will notice immediately," Charles said, stating the obvious. "I should hope so," Camilla replied, her tone light, but her meaning clear. "What's the point of wearing beautiful jewelry if no one sees it?" Lady Susan busied herself with arranging Camilla's evening bag, pretending not to hear the undercurrents in the conversation. She had served the royal family long enough to recognize when she was witnessing a moment that would likely be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Charles studied his wife's face in the mirror, trying to read the motivations behind her choice. Camilla had always been more direct than the traditional royal approach preferred. She had never fully embraced the careful diplomacy and subtle maneuvering that characterized most royal interactions. This directness had often gotten her into trouble in the early years, but it had also become one of her most authentic qualities. "Are you ready for the questions this will raise?" he asked quietly. Camilla turned from the mirror to face him directly. "I've been answering questions about my place in this family for over 20 years, Charles. One more evening of speculation won't change anything." The statement hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of decades of public scrutiny, media criticism, and the long journey from royal mistress to queen consort. Camilla had endured death threats, public protests, and years of comparison to Diana that she could never win. Yet she had persevered, gradually earning a grudging respect from the British public through steady service and genuine dedication to her charitable causes. Charles took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that betrayed her nervousness despite her confident words. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." "Don't I?" she asked, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes I think the proving never ends." The conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock at the door. Their private secretary entered to inform them that their car was waiting and the guests were beginning to arrive. The gala would officially begin in 30 minutes, and royal protocol demanded that they arrive precisely on schedule. As they made their way through the palace corridors toward the grand entrance, Camilla could feel the weight of the diamonds around her neck with each step. The necklace seemed to grow heavier as they approached the ballroom, as if each diamond carried the weight of the decision she had made. The staff they passed in the corridors did double takes, their trained professional demeanor faltering slightly as they recognized the famous piece. Word would spread quickly through the palace's network of employees, reaching the security detail, the photographers, and eventually the press pool before Camilla and Charles even entered the ballroom. Charles offered his arm as they paused outside the ballroom's grand doors. Beyond those doors waited 300 of Britain's most influential citizens, along with a carefully selected group of photographers who would capture every moment of the evening for tomorrow's newspapers. "Last chance," Charles murmured, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. Camilla straightened her shoulders, the diamonds catching the light from the crystal chandelier above them. "I'm a queen consort, Charles. It's time I started acting like it." The doors opened, and the royal couple stepped into the spotlight. The immediate hush that fell over the assembled crowd was followed by the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters as photographers captured the moment. The diamond Riviere necklace blazed in the bright lights, impossible to miss and equally impossible to mistake for anything other than what it was. From across the room, several guests exchanged knowing glances. Those familiar with royal jewelry recognized the piece immediately, and the whispered conversations began almost instantly. The evening's program would continue as planned, but the real story of the night had just begun to unfold. Camilla smiled graciously as she and Charles began their progress through the receiving line, greeting each guest with practiced warmth. But with each handshake and polite conversation, she was acutely aware of the eyes fixed on her necklace, the subtle glances, and barely concealed surprise of those who understood the significance of her choice. The game had begun, and Queen Camilla had made the opening move. The question now was how the rest of the royal family, particularly Catherine, would respond to this bold statement. As the evening progressed, and the cameras continued to flash, one thing became clear. The diamond Riviere necklace would never look quite the same on anyone again. The queen consort had claimed her place in royal hierarchy in the most visible way possible, and there would be no going back from this moment. The ramifications of this single jewelry choice would ripple through the monarchy for months to come, challenging assumptions about precedence, status, and the delicate balance of power within the House of Windsor. As Camilla moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and making conversation, she carried herself with a new confidence. The necklace had become more than an accessory. It was a declaration of intent, a statement of equality, and, perhaps most importantly, a signal that the careful deference of the past was finally coming to an end. Charles stood near the grand piano in the corner of the ballroom, a crystal glass of champagne untouched in his hand as he watched his wife navigate the crowd with practiced ease. The diamond Riviere necklace caught the light with every movement she made, creating a dazzling display that seemed to draw every eye in the room toward her. What should have been a routine royal engagement had transformed into something far more complex. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, approached with the careful stride of a man bearing uncomfortable news. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Charles had worked with him long enough to read the subtle signs of concern in his posture. "Your Majesty," Sir Clive said quietly, positioning himself so their conversation couldn't be overheard, "the photographers are asking about the necklace." Charles wasn't surprised. The royal press corps was exceptionally well-versed in the details of the crown jewels, and many of them had photographed Catherine wearing this particular piece dozens of times. They would have recognized it immediately and would now be crafting the narrative that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. "What exactly are they asking?" Charles inquired, though he suspected he already knew. Whether this represents a shift in jewelry protocols, if the Princess of Wales was consulted about tonight's choice, and Sir Clive paused delicately, whether there are any tensions within the family that the public should be aware of. The questions were predictable but dangerous. The British press had spent decades analyzing every detail of royal family dynamics, turning minor incidents into major stories, and reading significance into the smallest gestures. A jewelry choice that might seem trivial to outsiders could become the foundation for weeks of speculation about family rifts, power struggles, and the future of the monarchy. Charles glanced across the room, where Camilla was speaking with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the diamonds at her throat sparkling as she gestured animatedly about her literacy charity work. She appeared completely at ease, showing no signs of the nervousness she had displayed in their private moments earlier. This was Camilla at her best, confident, engaged, and genuinely passionate about her causes. "Has anyone contacted Kensington Palace?" Charles asked. "Not yet, Your Majesty. Protocol suggests we should coordinate our response first." The delicate dance of royal communications was something Charles had observed throughout his life, but was still learning to orchestrate as king. Every statement, every photograph, and every public appearance had to be carefully considered for its potential impact on the monarchy's image and the family's relationships. princess and approached them. Her own jewelry choices tonight notably understated, a simple strand of pearls that had belonged to their mother. As the king's sister, and held a unique position in the family hierarchy, old enough to remember when royal protocol was more rigid, yet practical enough to understand the need for modernization. Interesting choice Camilla made tonight, and said without preamble, her direct manner unchanged by the grandeur of their surroundings. Charles studied his sister's expression, trying to determine whether her comment carried approval or criticism, and had always been supportive of Camilla, particularly after their marriage, but she was also fiercely protective of royal traditions and the carefully maintained balance within the family. "She looks magnificent," Charles replied carefully. "She does," and agreed, then added, "though I suspect Catherine might have some thoughts about tonight when she sees tomorrow's photographs." The Princess Royal's observation highlighted the complexity of the situation. Catherine was currently at Amer Hall in Norfolk, attending an evening event for local schools, and completely unaware that her signature necklace was currently adorning the Queen Consort at the most photographed royal event of the month. Sir Clive cleared his throat softly. "Your Majesty, we should consider calling Kensington Palace to give them advance notice. The Princess of Wales's team will want to prepare their response before the morning papers are published." Charles felt the familiar weight of kingship settling on his shoulders. These are the moments when being a husband, father, and brother became secondary to being the monarch. Every decision he made now would be scrutinized for its impact on the institution of the monarchy, regardless of his personal feelings about the situation. "What time is Catherine's event scheduled to end?" he asked. "Approximately 10:30, Your Majesty. She'll likely see the early digital editions before retiring for the evening." The timeline was problematic. By the time Catherine finished her engagement and checked the news, photographs from tonight's gala would already be circulating online. The royal correspondent Twitter accounts will be buzzing with analysis and speculation, and the story would be gaining momentum without any official response from either palace. Charles watched Camilla move through another cluster of guests, noting how naturally she wore the necklace. The piece seemed made for her, complementing her coloring and the elegant lines of her gown perfectly. But beauty and appropriateness were secondary considerations when measured against the complex politics of royal jewelry. The Duke of Gloucester joined their small group, his expression troubled. "Charles, people are talking." As one of the Queen's cousins and a working royal for over 4 decades, the Duke had witnessed numerous royal controversies and understood the subtle signs that indicated when a situation was developing beyond normal palace management. "What are they saying?" Charles asked, though he suspected the answer would be uncomfortable. Speculation about whether this signals a change in precedence within the family. Some are interpreting it as Camilla asserting equal status with Catherine rather than acknowledging her position as queen-in-waiting. The analysis was astute and problematic. Royal precedence was a complex system that governed everything from the order of formal processions to who spoke first at public events. While Camilla held the title of Queen Consort, most observers understood that Catherine's position as future queen gave her a special status that transcended current titles. Charles found himself caught between his loyalty to his wife and his responsibility to maintain harmony within the family. Camilla's choice to wear the necklace was bold and perhaps overdue. She had spent years carefully deferring to Catherine in matters of precedence and public attention. Yet the timing and manner of this assertion could create tensions that might take months to resolve. "Has anyone spoken with William?" Princess Anne asked, referring to Catherine's husband and Charles's heir. "The Prince of Wales is attending a veterans' dinner in Scotland," Sir Clive replied. "He's not expected to be available until tomorrow morning." The absence of both William and Catherine from tonight's event had likely influenced Camilla's decision to wear the necklace. With the younger royals away, there was no immediate family member present to potentially be overshadowed or offended by the choice. But their absence also meant that the first they would learn of tonight's events would be through media reports rather than family communication. Charles excused himself from the group and walked toward the palace's portrait gallery, seeking a moment of quiet to consider his options. The familiar faces of his ancestors gazed down at him from gilt frames, monarchs who had navigated their own complex family dynamics and public challenges. His great-great-grandmother, Queen Alexandra, had dealt with similar jewelry politics when she was queen consort, carefully managing her relationship with the future Queen Mary while maintaining her own dignity and status. The parallels weren't exact, but the underlying tensions were remarkably similar. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Camilla appeared in the doorway, having noticed his departure from the main event. The necklace continued to catch the light even in the dimmer gallery, its brilliance undimmed by the change in venue. "Are you having second thoughts about my choice?" she asked directly, approaching with the confident stride of a woman who had made her decision and intended to stand by it. "I'm considering the implications," Charles replied honestly. "And what conclusions have you reached?" Charles studied his wife's face, noting the determined set of her jaw and the spark of defiance in her eyes. This was the Camilla who had weathered decades of public criticism and media scrutiny, who had rebuilt her reputation through sheer persistence and genuine dedication to her duties. "That you've chosen to make a statement tonight, and now we all have to live with the consequences." Camilla adjusted the necklace slightly, the gesture unconscious but telling. "I've spent 15 years as your wife, being extraordinarily careful not to overshadow Catherine, not to claim too much attention, not to appear to compete with the future queen. Tonight, I decided that careful deference has gone on long enough." Her words carried the weight of years of restraint and calculated public behavior. Camilla had indeed been meticulously careful in her approach to royal duties, always ensuring that Catherine received the primary attention and acclaim. This deference had been both politically wise and personally costly. "The press will frame this as competition between you and Catherine," Charles warned. "The press has been framing everything as competition between us since the day William announced their engagement," Camilla replied. "At least now, I'm competing on equal terms." The statement revealed the depth of thought behind tonight's decision. This wasn't an impulsive choice or a moment of rebellion. It was a calculated move by a woman who had finally decided to claim her full status as queen consort rather than continuing to play the role of grateful understudy. Charles moved closer to his wife, close enough to see the subtle signs of nervousness she was working to conceal. Despite her confident exterior, this decision had cost her considerable emotional energy. "Are you prepared for Catherine's reaction?" he asked gently. "I'm prepared for whatever comes," Camilla replied, though her voice carried a slight tremor that suggested the bravado required effort to maintain. "And William is a future king. He'll understand that his stepmother has finally stopped apologizing for her position." The description of herself as William's stepmother rather than using more formal royal titles was significant. It humanized their relationship while also asserting her legitimate place within the family structure. Charles took her hand, feeling the familiar comfort of their long partnership. Whatever challenges tonight's choice might create, he knew they would face them together. After surviving the transition from hidden relationship to royal marriage to coronation, they had developed an unshakable foundation of mutual support. "We should return to our guests," he said finally. "Yes," Camilla agreed. "We should. And Charles? Thank you for supporting my choice, even if you're not entirely comfortable with it." As they walked back toward the ballroom, Charles reflected on the evolution of their relationship and Camilla's position within the monarchy. She had earned her place through years of dedicated service and had proven herself worthy of the respect that tonight's jewelry choice was finally claiming. The evening's remaining hours would unfold with careful attention to protocol and duty, but the real story had already been written. Queen Camilla had drawn a line in the sand, and the royal family would have to navigate the new landscape her decision had created. The diamond Riviere necklace would return to its case at the end of the evening, but its impact would continue to reverberate through the halls of both Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace for weeks to come. The Queen Consort had finally stepped fully into her role, and there would be no stepping back. Catherine sat in the back seat of the official car as it wound through the Norfolk countryside toward Amber Hall. the windows down to let in the crisp evening air. The school charity event had been a tremendous success, with over 200 local children participating in reading activities and educational games. These smaller, community-focused engagements were among her favorites, intimate enough to allow for genuine connections, yet significant enough to bring real attention to important causes. Her private secretary, Hannah Cockburn-Logie, sat beside her reviewing the evening's photographs on a tablet, selecting the best images for tomorrow's social media posts. Catherine had learned early in her royal career that the work didn't end when the public event concluded. Every appearance generated hours of additional administrative work and strategic communication planning. "The photographs from the reading circle are lovely," Hannah said, showing Catherine images of her sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of 6-year-olds, listening intently as they took turns reading from picture books. "The literacy charity will be thrilled with the coverage." Catherine smiled at the images, remembering the earnest face of young Sophie who had struggled through a difficult passage before finally succeeding. These were the moments that made all the protocol and preparation worthwhile, real connections with real people facing real challenges. Her personal protection officer, Inspector Sarah Mitchell, turned from the front seat with an apologetic expression. "Your Royal Highness, I'm receiving some urgent messages from Kensington Palace. They're requesting that you contact your communications team as soon as possible." The request was unusual enough to immediately capture Catherine's attention. Emergency communications were rare and typically reserved for genuine crises or significant developments that required immediate royal family coordination. Her first thought was concern for the children. Louis had been fighting a minor cold, and Charlotte had complained of a headache that morning. "Is everything all right with the family?" Catherine asked, her maternal instincts overriding any other considerations. "As far as I know, ma'am, everyone is well." This appears to be related to media coverage from tonight's Royal Foundation Gala. Catherine felt a moment of confusion. The gala was a routine annual event, typically generating positive but unremarkable coverage. She and William had attended numerous times in previous years, and it had never produced anything that required urgent family consultation. What could have happened at a charity gala that requires immediate attention, she wondered aloud. Inspector Mitchell's expression suggested she knew more than she was comfortable sharing in this setting. "Perhaps it would be best to speak directly with your team, ma'am." The 20-minute drive to Amer Hall felt unusually long as Catherine's mind raced through possible scenarios. Had there been a security incident? A diplomatic embarrassment? Some kind of protest or disruption? The Royal Foundation Gala was one of the most carefully managed events on the royal calendar, with guest lists vetted months in advance and security protocols that bordered on the excessive. As soon as they arrived at Amer Hall, Catherine went directly to her private study and called Amanda Foster, her head of communications. Amanda answered on the first ring, suggesting she had been waiting for the call. "Catherine, I'm glad you're calling. We have a situation that requires your input on how to respond." "What kind of situation?" Catherine asked, settling into the comfortable chair she used for private conversations. "Queen Camilla attended tonight's gala wearing your diamond Riviera necklace. The photographs are already circulating online, and we're expecting significant media coverage tomorrow." Catherine felt a moment of complete disorientation, as if the words she had just heard didn't quite make sense when arranged in that particular order. The diamond Riviera necklace was unquestionably her signature piece, worn to dozens of high-profile events over the past decade. It had become so associated with her public image that royal watchers often commented when she chose other jewelry instead. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Catherine asked, certain she had misunderstood something fundamental about Amanda's statement. "The Queen Consort wore your necklace to tonight's gala. The one with the graduated diamonds that was restrung for you in 2014. The photographers captured it very clearly, and it's creating quite a stir among the royal correspondents." Catherine stood up from her chair and walked to the window, looking out at the carefully maintained gardens that had become one of her favorite aspects of life at Amer Hall. The view had always calmed her, but tonight it failed to provide its usual sense of peace. "How is that possible?" she asked, Though even as she spoke, she realized the question revealed her own naivety about royal jewelry protocols. Technically, all crown jewels belong to the monarch and can be worn by any senior royal, Amanda explained gently. But practically speaking, certain pieces become associated with specific family members, and crossing those lines creates exactly the kind of media circus we try to avoid, Catherine finished the thought. Amanda's silence confirmed that this situation was indeed as problematic as Catherine was beginning to understand. The Diamond Riviere necklace wasn't just jewelry. It had become part of her royal identity, featured in official portraits and worn to some of the most significant events of her tenure as Princess of Wales. What are the photographers saying? Catherine asked, dreading the answer. They're speculating about everything from family tensions to power struggles within the monarchy. Some are framing it as Camilla asserting equal status, others as a deliberate challenge to your position as future queen. The most generous interpretation is that it represents a new era of jewelry sharing among senior female royals. Catherine sank back in her chair, understanding immediately that none of those interpretations would be helpful for family harmony or public perception of royal unity. The British press had spent years looking for any signs of conflict between her and Camilla, and this situation provided exactly the kind of material that could fuel months of speculation and analysis. Have we heard anything from Buckingham Palace? Not yet, though I expect they're dealing with their own communications challenges tonight. Sir Clive Alderton will likely be working late, trying to craft a response that doesn't make things worse. Catherine's mind raced through the implications of tonight's events. Every major media outlet would cover the story. Royal correspondents would spend hours analyzing the significance of the jewelry choice, and social media would be buzzing with opinions and theories. More importantly, she would have to navigate her personal response to what felt like a very public assertion of status by her stepmother-in-law. What's our recommended response? Catherine asked, falling back on the professional training that had guided her through a decade of royal challenges. That depends partly on your personal feelings about the situation, Amanda replied carefully. We could frame it positively as a lovely example of family jewelry sharing, express pleasure that the necklace was enjoyed by another family member, or remain silent, and let the story fade on its own. Each option carried different risks and benefits, and Catherine understood that her choice would send its own message about her relationship with Camilla and her confidence in her own position within the royal hierarchy. Her phone buzzed with a text message from William. Saw the photos. Are you all right? We should talk tomorrow. The message confirmed that news of tonight's events was spreading quickly through royal circles. William's tone suggested concern rather than anger, but she knew he would be as surprised by Camilla's choice as she was. Catherine. Amanda's voice brought her attention back to the phone call. Do you need time to consider our response? Yes, but not too much time. I assume the morning shows will want statements for their early broadcasts. The requests are already coming in. We could buy a few hours, but by tomorrow afternoon we'll need to have a clear position. After ending the call, Catherine sat in her study, contemplating the evening's unexpected turn. The Diamond Riviere necklace had been given to her by Queen Elizabeth specifically for her role as future queen consort. The late queen had personally selected it from the royal collection and had it restrung to complement Catherine's coloring and style. More than the jewelry itself, tonight's events challenged the careful understanding that had governed her relationship with Camilla for over a decade. They had developed a cordial working relationship based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. Camilla had consistently deferred to Catherine's position as future queen, while Catherine had always shown appropriate respect for Camilla's current status as queen consort. Catherine walked upstairs to check on her children, finding all three sleeping peacefully in their beds. George had fallen asleep with a book about aircraft still open beside him. Charlotte was clutching her favorite stuffed animal, and Louis had managed to completely twist his blankets into an impossible knot. These quiet domestic moments reminded her of what truly mattered and helped put royal protocol disputes into proper perspective. Returning to her study, Catherine opened her laptop and looked at the early online coverage of tonight's gala. The photographs of Camilla wearing the Diamond Riviere necklace were indeed striking. The piece suited her well, and she looked confident and regal in a way that Catherine had to admit was genuinely impressive. But beyond the aesthetic considerations lay deeper questions about respect, communication, and the future of their relationship. Had Camilla deliberately chosen tonight to make this statement because she knew Catherine would be absent? Was this a calculated move designed to assert her status, or simply a jewelry choice that had been given more significance than intended? Catherine's phone rang again, this time showing Charles's private number. She hesitated before answering, unsure whether this conversation would provide clarity or create additional complications. "Catherine, I hope I'm not calling too late." "Of course not. I assume you're calling about tonight." "Yes. I wanted you to hear directly from me that Camilla's choice tonight was her decision alone. I didn't encourage it, though I didn't stop it either." Charles's tone carried a mixture of apology and defensiveness that suggested he was as uncertain about tonight's events as everyone else involved. Was she making some kind of statement? Catherine asked directly. "I believe she was," Charles replied after a pause, "though I'm not entirely certain what that statement was meant to convey." The honesty in his response was both refreshing and troubling. If Charles himself wasn't sure about his wife's motivations, then tonight's events were even more complex than Catherine had initially understood. "How do you think we should handle this?" she asked. "With grace and dignity, as you always do, and perhaps with a conversation between you and Camilla when you're both ready for it." The suggestion was reasonable but daunting. Catherine had never had to navigate a direct challenge to her status within the royal family, and she wasn't certain about the best approach for addressing tonight's events while preserving important relationships. As she prepared for bed later that evening, Catherine caught sight of herself in the dressing room mirror. Without the diamond Riviere necklace, her reflection looked somehow different, less formal, perhaps, but also less certain of her place in the grand hierarchy of royal precedence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and require difficult decisions about how to respond to Camilla's bold statement. But tonight, Catherine simply had to accept that the careful balance of their family dynamics had shifted, and nothing would be quite the same again. The newsroom at the Daily Telegraph buzzed with activity at 6:30 in the morning, hours before most of London had awakened. Royal correspondent Victoria Ward sat at her desk, surrounded by printouts of photographs from the previous evening's gala. Her laptop opened to 3 different social media platforms where royal watchers were dissecting every angle of Queen Camilla's jewelry choice. Rebecca English, the Daily Mail's royal editor, had called her 20 minutes earlier with barely contained excitement. "Victoria, please tell me you saw the photographs from last night. This is the biggest royal story since the Oprah interview." Victoria studied the high-resolution images her photographer colleague had transmitted from the gala. There was no ambiguity about what she was seeing. Queen Camilla was unmistakably wearing the diamond Riviere necklace that had become Catherine's signature piece. The quality of the photographs left no room for misidentification, and the significance was immediately apparent to anyone familiar with royal jewelry protocols. Her phone rang constantly as fellow journalists, royal commentators, and international media outlets sought her analysis of the situation. The story was gaining momentum across multiple continents, with American and Commonwealth media outlets picking up the coverage and adding their own cultural interpretations to the events. "Ward speaking," she answered, tucking the phone between her shoulder and ear while continuing to type her analysis piece. "Victoria, it's James Crawford from the BBC. We're preparing a segment for this morning's news and would like your perspective on the significance of last night's jewelry choice." James was one of the most respected royal correspondents in Britain, with sources throughout the palace system and an encyclopedic knowledge of royal protocol. If he was calling for her opinion, the story had definitely reached the level of major news rather than simple gossip column material. "What angle are you pursuing?" Victoria asked, curious about how the BBC would frame such a delicate story. "We're focusing on what this might signal about evolving roles within the royal family, whether it represents Queen Camilla stepping into a more prominent position, or if there are underlying tensions we should be aware of." Victoria appreciated the diplomatic language, but she understood the subtext. The BBC couldn't directly speculate about family conflicts, but they could certainly explore the implications of royal precedents and the symbolic meaning of jewelry choices. The Diamond Riviera necklace has been exclusively associated with the Princess of Wales for over a decade, Victoria explained, choosing her words carefully. This is the first time it's been worn publicly by another member of the royal family since it was restrung for Catherine in 2014. And the significance of that. In royal terms, jewelry often carries messages about status, relationships, and hierarchy. When pieces are closely associated with particular family members, any deviation from that pattern tends to be interpreted as meaningful. Victoria ended the call and returned to her article, trying to craft language that conveyed the magnitude of last night's events without resorting to tabloid sensationalism. The story required careful handling. Too little analysis would miss the genuine significance, while too much speculation could damage relationships and spread misinformation. Her colleague Sarah Hughes appeared at her desk with fresh coffee and a stack of international newspaper front pages that had already been published online. "Look at this," Sarah said, spreading the papers across Victoria's desk. The story is everywhere. The Australian newspapers led with headlines about royal rivalry and crown jewel controversy. French publications focused on the fashion aspects while hinting at deeper family dynamics. American outlets were drawing parallels to historical royal conflicts and speculating about the influence of monarchy advisors. Most concerning was the tabloid coverage, which had already begun creating narratives about jealousy, competition, and family warfare. These publications had less concern for accuracy or diplomatic language, and their interpretations would likely shape public perception regardless of the actual facts. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from a source within Kensington Palace. No official statement planned today. Princess focused on upcoming engagements. Situation being handled privately. The message was carefully worded, but revealing. The absence of an immediate public response suggested that Catherine and her team were still determining the best approach, while the emphasis on private handling indicated they hoped to manage the situation without escalating media attention. A similar message arrived from Buckingham Palace sources. Queen Consort continues normal schedule. No special significance intended by jewelry choice. Focus remains on charitable work. The official responses were predictably diplomatic, but Victoria noted the subtle differences in tone. Kensington Palace emphasized privacy and future focus, while Buckingham Palace minimized the significance of the jewelry choice itself. Neither response directly addressed the underlying questions about protocol and family dynamics. At 8 o'clock, Victoria joined the morning editorial meeting where the royal story dominated discussion. Editor Michael Johnson had already fielded calls from the paper's management about ensuring their coverage struck the appropriate balance between newsworthiness and responsible reporting. "What's your assessment of the situation's longevity?" Michael asked. "Is this a one-day story or something that will develop over time?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "That depends largely on how the family responds. If they maintain silence and continue with normal activities, it could fade within a week. But if there are any signs of ongoing tension or if other family members make their own statements, it could run for months." Michael finished the thought. The meeting concluded with assignments for follow-up coverage, including interviews with royal historians about precedent, analysis of social media reactions, and monitoring for any additional statements from palace sources. The story had enough elements to sustain coverage for an extended period if it developed in interesting directions. Victoria returned to her desk to find several missed calls from international television networks requesting live interviews for their morning programs. The global appetite for royal news meant that even relatively minor developments could become major stories when they touched on family dynamics and traditional protocols. At 10 o'clock, she joined a live television discussion with historian Dr. Anna Whitelock and royal biographer Andrew Morton. The format allowed for more nuanced analysis than newspaper coverage could provide, though the time constraints still limited the depth of exploration possible. "Dr. Whitelock," the presenter began, How unusual is it for senior royals to share significant jewelry pieces? Historically, jewelry sharing has been common within royal families, Dr. Whitelock replied. But in recent decades, certain pieces have become strongly associated with particular individuals. When those associations are disrupted, it naturally raises questions about motivations and meanings. Andrew Morton, whose biography of Princess Diana had established him as an expert on royal family dynamics, offered a different perspective. We have to remember that Queen Camilla has spent years being extraordinarily careful about her public image and her relationship with other family members. For her to make such a visible choice suggests this was a calculated decision rather than a casual jewelry selection. The discussion continued for 12 minutes, touching on everything from historical precedent to modern media coverage of royal events. Victoria contributed analysis about the likely palace responses and the challenge of managing such stories in the age of social media. After the broadcast, Victoria checked the trending topics on Twitter and found that variations of royal necklace, Camilla Kate, and Diamond Riviere were among the most discussed subjects globally. The conversation included everything from supportive messages about family jewelry sharing to harsh criticism of perceived royal infighting. One particularly viral tweet from a popular royal watching account had generated thousands of responses. When your mother-in-law wears your signature necklace to the biggest event of the month without asking. We've all been there, right? Hashtag royal problems, hashtag Camilla Kate. The social media coverage revealed the extent to which the public had anthropomorphized the royal family, relating their dynamics to common family experiences and projecting ordinary relationship tensions onto extraordinary circumstances. Victoria's phone buzzed with another call from Rebecca English. Have you seen the latest development? What development? Princess Anne was photographed this morning at her engagement in Edinburgh wearing Queen Elizabeth's sapphire brooch, the one that Catherine wore to last year's state banquet. The photographers are going mad trying to determine if it's connected to last night's events. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. If other family members were making their own jewelry statements, the story could evolve far beyond a simple dispute about a single necklace. The royal family's complex web of relationships and protocols could be entering a period of unprecedented public examination. Are we certain it's the same brooch? Absolutely certain. And Princess Anne never wears that particular piece. It's been Catherine's go-to for formal events since 2019. Victoria immediately began researching photographs of Princess Anne's recent appearances, confirming that this morning's brooch choice was indeed unusual. Whether it represented solidarity with Camilla, support for Catherine, or simply coincidental timing would be impossible to determine without official statements. By noon, the story had evolved into something far more complex than a single jewelry choice. Royal watchers were analyzing every accessory worn by senior family members, looking for additional signs of shifting dynamics or hidden messages. The coverage had taken on a life of its own, driven by public fascination with royal relationships and the media's appetite for ongoing narratives. Victoria's article for the next day's edition would need to acknowledge these new developments while maintaining focus on the central questions raised by Camilla's original choice. The Diamond Riviere necklace had become the catalyst for a much broader examination of royal family relationships, and there was no telling where the story might lead. As afternoon approached, Victoria reflected on the unique position of royal correspondents in British journalism. They were tasked with covering public figures whose every gesture carried potential significance, whose relationships affected national institutions, and whose private dynamics played out on the world stage. Last night's gala had provided exactly the kind of story that justified the intensive coverage royal correspondents provided, a single moment that revealed deeper truths about power, relationships, and the evolution of one of the world's most scrutinized families. The Diamond Riviere necklace would eventually be returned to its secure storage, but the questions it had raised would continue to shape royal coverage for months to come. Victoria began drafting her analysis piece for tomorrow's edition, knowing that her words would be read by millions of people trying to understand the significance of what they had witnessed. In the complex world of royal journalism, last night's events represented both a professional challenge and a fascinating glimpse into the private dynamics of Britain's most public family. 3 weeks after the Royal Foundation Gala, Catherine sat in the morning room at Kensington Palace, sunlight streaming through the tall windows as she reviewed the final details for that afternoon's meeting with Queen Camilla. The media storm had gradually subsided, replaced by speculation about royal schedules and careful analysis of every public appearance by both women. The intervening weeks had been challenging but illuminating. Catherine had watched as public opinion slowly shifted from initial shock through various interpretations and, finally, toward a grudging acceptance that perhaps the jewelry controversy had been overblown. The most significant development had been the emergence of a new narrative, one that framed the incident as a sign of growing confidence and unity within the royal family rather than evidence of conflict. William entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea, a gesture of domestic normalcy that grounded their conversation in their personal relationship rather than royal protocol. He had been her closest advisor throughout the situation, offering perspective that balanced family harmony with institutional responsibility. "Are you ready for this afternoon?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "As ready as I can be," Catherine replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "I've thought about what I want to say, but I suppose the actual conversation will determine how things develop." The meeting had been arranged through careful diplomatic channels, with both private secretaries coordinating schedules and ensuring appropriate privacy. Neither woman wanted their conversation to become another media spectacle, so they had chosen Clarence House as the venue, neutral ground that belonged to Charles but felt comfortable to both of them. William studied his wife's expression, noting the quiet determination that had emerged over the past 3 weeks. The initial hurt and confusion had given way to something more constructive, a recognition that the incident had provided an opportunity to clarify relationships and expectations that had remained unspoken for too long. "What outcome are you hoping for?" he asked. "Honestly, I want to understand what she was trying to communicate that night, and I want to make sure we can move forward without this kind of public uncertainty about our relationship." Catherine's approach reflected the diplomatic skills she had developed over more than a decade of royal life. Rather than focusing on blame or grievance, she was seeking understanding and resolution. This maturity had been evident in her handling of the media coverage, which had remained dignified and constructive throughout the controversy. At 2 o'clock, Catherine's car arrived at Clarence House, where she was greeted by Lady Susan Hussey and escorted to Camilla's private sitting room. The Queen Consort was waiting with her own tea service, dressed in a simple blue dress that complemented her coloring without making any particular fashion statement. "Catherine, thank you for coming," Camilla said, rising to greet her stepdaughter-in-law with a warmth that seemed genuine rather than diplomatic. "Thank you for suggesting we meet," Catherine replied, settling into the comfortable chair Camilla indicated. The room felt intimate despite its grand proportions, filled with personal photographs and books that revealed Camilla's interests in literature and history. This was clearly a space where the Queen Consort felt most herself, removed from the formal requirements of public appearances and state occasions. "I suppose we should address the elephant in the room," Camilla said with characteristic directness. "Or should I say, the necklace in the room?" Catherine appreciated the slight humor in Camilla's tone, which helped ease some of the tension she had been carrying for 3 weeks. "I've been wondering about your choice that evening." "I'm sure you have. And I owe you an explanation, though I'm not certain I can give you one that will completely make sense." Camilla paused to pour tea, the familiar ritual providing a moment for both women to compose their thoughts. When she continued, her voice carried a vulnerability that Catherine had rarely heard before. "For 15 years, I've been extraordinarily careful about my place in this family. Careful not to overshadow you. Careful not to appear competitive. Careful to always acknowledge your position as the future queen. That carefulness has been both necessary and exhausting." Catherine listened without interrupting, recognizing the significance of this candid admission. Camilla's public image had always emphasized grace under pressure, but This conversation was revealing the personal cost of that sustained diplomatic performance. The night of the gala, I looked at that necklace and thought about how long I'd been apologizing for my existence in this family. I decided that I was tired of apologizing. "You've never needed to apologize to me," Catherine said softly. "Perhaps not to you personally," Camilla replied, "but to the institution, to the media, to the public who still sometimes sees me as an unwelcome addition to the royal family. Wearing your necklace was my way of saying that I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to keep pretending to be less than I am." The explanation was more personal and more complex than Catherine had anticipated. She had expected political calculations or statements about royal hierarchy, but Camilla's motivation appeared to be rooted in something deeper, a desire for authentic recognition after years of careful self-diminishment. "I can understand that," Catherine said carefully, "but it put me in a very difficult position. I know it did, and I'm sorry for that. I should have spoken with you first, should have found a way to have this conversation before making such a public statement." The apology felt genuine, and Catherine recognized the courage it had taken for Camilla to admit fault while also maintaining her underlying position. This was a woman trying to balance authenticity with responsibility, personal needs with family harmony. "What I'm struggling to understand," Catherine continued, "is why that particular piece on that particular night. The Diamond Riviere has become so closely associated with my public role that wearing it felt like I was claiming your identity rather than asserting my own." Camilla finished the thought. "You're absolutely right, and that wasn't my intention, though I can see how it appeared that way." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, touching on everything from media management to family dynamics to the challenges of maintaining individual identity within institutional roles. Both women spoke with increasing openness as they discovered shared frustrations about public expectations and private pressures. "There's something else I want to discuss," Camilla said as their conversation began to wind down. "Charles has been developing ideas about modernizing some of our protocols, particularly around jewelry and formal precedents." Catherine felt a spike of interest mixed with wariness. Changes to royal protocol required careful consideration and could have far-reaching implications for public perception and family relationships. What kind of changes? Less rigid associations between specific pieces and particular family members. More flexibility in how we approach formal events and public appearances. Essentially, acknowledgement that we're all senior members of the same institution rather than competitors for limited attention and resources. The proposal was intriguing and potentially beneficial, but Catherine understood the complexities involved. Royal protocols existed for reasons that went beyond simple tradition. They provided structure and predictability that helped manage public expectations and media coverage. That could work, Catherine said thoughtfully, but it would require very careful implementation and clear communication about our intentions. Agreed. And it would require us to trust each other rather than constantly worrying about media interpretation of every choice we make. As their meeting concluded, both women seemed to have reached an understanding that went beyond simply resolving the necklace controversy. They had identified underlying tensions that had been affecting their relationship and had begun developing a framework for addressing those issues constructively. "I have a proposal," Catherine said as they prepared to part. "What if we made our next joint appearance together deliberately collaborative? Something that shows we're working as partners rather than parallel figures." "What did you have in mind?" "The literacy charity event next month. We could co-host it, share speaking responsibilities, and demonstrate that senior royal women can work together effectively." Camilla's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "That's a brilliant idea. And perhaps we could both wear pieces from the Diamond Parure collection, different pieces that complement each other rather than compete." The suggestion demonstrated that both women had learned something valuable from the past 3 weeks of controversy and reflection. Instead of avoiding jewelry symbolism, they were proposing to use it constructively to send positive messages about royal family unity and cooperation. 1 month later, The joint literacy event became one of the most positively covered royal engagements of the year. Photographs of Catherine and Camilla working together, both wearing complementary diamond pieces from the royal collection, dominated front pages and social media with captions celebrating royal collaboration and mutual respect. The Diamond Riviere necklace remained in the royal collection, available to any senior royal who wished to wear it. But it was no longer a symbol of territorial claims or family tensions. Instead, it had become a catalyst for honest conversation and positive change within one of the world's most scrutinized families. Charles watched the coverage of the literacy event with satisfaction, recognizing that the apparent crisis of 3 weeks earlier had ultimately strengthened family relationships and improved public perception of royal unity. The two most important women in his life had navigated a difficult situation with grace and wisdom, emerging with a stronger partnership than ever before. As Catherine prepared for bed that evening, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a single jewelry choice at a charity gala. The experience had taught her important lessons about communication, assumption, and the need for direct conversation rather than diplomatic silence when relationships were under strain. The Diamond Riviere necklace would continue to sparkle at royal events, worn by whichever family member chose it for any particular occasion. But its real legacy would be the honest conversation it had prompted and the stronger relationships that had emerged from that period of uncertainty and growth. In the complex world of royal relationships, where every gesture carried potential significance and every choice could become a public statement, Catherine and Camilla had discovered that direct communication and mutual respect could overcome even the most challenging misunderstandings. The necklace controversy had ended, but the trust and partnership it had ultimately created would endure for years to come.